Investigators in the Gabby Petito case announce a major new development. Remains matching Gabby's description have been found in Wyoming.
The cause of death has not been determined at this time.
Gabby Petito was reported missing and later recovered under a grove of trees at the Grand Teton National Park. Her fiancé, Brian Laundrie, has disappeared and is being hunted by law enforcement. Right away, people pointed out similarities in Brian Laundrie and Chris Watts. Not only do Chris and Brian look similar, but oddly enough, they also share the same name. Both of these men were said to be more quiet, reserved, and shy. Some would describe them as weird. They're introverted and prefer to be alone. We haven't heard from many people who know Brian, but most probably don't want to be associated with him right now. I'm anxiously waiting to see if young Brian was perceived by classmates as a little odd, having kept to himself, and not your typical teenager. Chris Watts' classmates said he seemed arrogant, almost like he thought he was better than everyone. I imagine Brian having this same mindset. Chris Watts allegedly has the IQ of a genius. Hard to believe, but book smart is completely different than common sense. Not much is known about Brian Laundrie yet, but just from reading how he wrote on Instagram, I would guess that he's at least not a complete idiot. He's an avid reader and is often seen with a book in his hands. One book that he was reading was called Annihilation, which is strange since Chris Watts is a family annihilator. Bottom line is, these two men were loners who did not enjoy interacting with people. They seem to have this internal hate for the human race. Since both of these men, well, boys, I'd rather call them boys because any man who puts his hands on a woman is not a man in my eyes. Anyway, with both being loners, maybe that's why they don't seem to have a lot of exes. Shanann was Chris Watts' first serious relationship. Is this also true for Brian? Maybe that's why none of his exes have spoken out yet. Just before the incidents, Brian and Chris seemed to be expressing an extreme love for something. Chris Watts was head over heels for his mistress Nicole, who he supposedly only knew for a couple of months. Chris's love for NK is like Brian Laundrie's passion for nature and his need to live an extreme economical lifestyle. Chris Watts also spent a weekend in July away with his nature-loving outdoorsy mistress at the sand dunes and camped at the Petito Falls. In July of this year, Brian and Gabby also visited the sand dunes. Not only are Chris and Brian similar, but Shanann and Gabby also had similar personality traits. They were both extremely beautiful women with lots of friends who described them as loving, caring, and kind with bubbly personalities. These women were social butterflies who had partners who were the exact opposite of them. They were ambitious and loved life. They also were very much social media buffs. Shanann constantly posted on Facebook, and Gabby was popular on Instagram. They both spent a lot of time taking pictures and posting online. Both were very passionate about what they were doing in their lives, and both Gabby and Shanann in some ways prioritized social media. Both presented themselves online as having this picture-perfect life. They appeared to be living the American dream and had lives that most would envy. Gabby and Shanann were loved and cherished by the public and have almost, in some ways, been idolized by others. Is this why both cases almost instantaneously got a lot of media coverage and blew up nationally? It's always baffled me why some cases get a lot of attention while others don't. Maybe it's because so much of their lives are shared online, and it's so shocking for us to see these lovely couples who seem to be so in love and happy, and it's just so devastating when we find out that clearly that wasn't the case. Individually, their personalities are very similar, but as couples, they also seem to be facing some of the same challenges. Both couples were well-traveled and appeared to be much wealthier than they actually were. We know Chris and Shanann definitely lived outside of their means. I would say this is also true for Brian and Gabby, because neither of them were working, but they were traveling across the country, which is really expensive. I'm guessing that they probably were being supported financially by their parents. Both couples were in situations where money was tight, and this likely caused some tension. We all know that money problems is the #1 cause of divorce in America. Unfortunately, Shanann and Gabby both dealt with having a significant other who likely did not support their dreams and goals in life. At one point, there were at least some signs of trouble. Both couples seemed to be at a pivotal moment in their relationships. Each had reasons to begin to question whether they should stay or leave. Gabby and Shanann appeared to be the ones who wanted to work things out, while Brian and Chris seemed to be leaning more towards a separation. Gabby was told by a female officer that her and Brian's relationship was toxic and they were separated for the night. Shanann expressed how she didn't feel safe since Chris said he no longer wanted the unborn child she was carrying. Brian had broken off the engagement months before, and Chris was attempting to separate from Shanann and working towards a divorce. Both appeared to be calm, cool, and collected in the midst of a very chaotic situation where they knew that they had done something wrong but somehow kept it together. After his crimes, Chris Watts went to work and was just cutting it up with his co-workers. Everyone said he acted completely normal. Brian Laundrie went back home without Gabby, in Gabby's van, and did his normal thing, doing what Brian Laundrie loves to do. Both fooled people with their casual, cool as a cucumber attitudes. Even though we haven't seen Brian after the tragic events, his attitude during the DV incident shows the same nonchalant behavior as Chris Watts during his porch interview. After committing these horrible acts, they continued with their lives as if nothing had changed, like they didn't have a care in the world. Neighbors saw Brian at home mowing the lawn and packing for a camping trip with his parents. Speaking of parents, Chris and Brian's parents were viewed the same by the public. They were suspected of having at least some knowledge of what had happened, and both seemed to try to protect their sons. Both sets of parents were heavily scrutinized by the public. Cindy Watts was bashed for her obvious hatred for Shanann. She showed a complete lack of care for what her son had done, and people were outraged over the way she spoke of Shanann. People have been furious with the Laundrie family for their lack of concern for Gabby, and have even tried to set up a memorial in their yard for her. The fact that Brian's parents are so concerned for Brian but didn't care enough to help find Gabby reminds us of the Watts family and their complete disregard for Shanann and her family. Shanann was horribly victim blamed, and this is unfortunately also happening for Gabby. Gabby was called the aggressor, and Brian was labeled the victim. Some chose to view Chris Watts as a victim and sympathized with him, and we are already seeing this happen with Brian Laundrie. While there are a lot of similarities, there are also some differences in these two cases, especially in the way that Chris and Brian handled the repercussions of their actions. Chris Watts was surprisingly cooperative with law enforcement. He was Mr. Yes Man. He allowed them to search the home, answered their questions, and even agreed to a lie detector test. When investigators suspected he was lying, Chris Watts very quickly broke. He didn't exactly tell the truth. He tried to blame Shanann and didn't accept responsibility, but thankfully he was arrested and he is now exactly where he belongs. Brian Laundrie reacted differently when it came time to face his consequences. He ran. He ran, and he's still running. He knows what he did, and he knows that we know what he did, and he knows that law enforcement knows what he did. So instead of fessing up, instead of accepting his punishment, he decided to run and hide. The question is he still hiding, or has he done something to hurt himself? From the beginning, I've thought that Brian would never allow himself to be taken into custody. Chris and Brian differ in that aspect because Chris later stated that he never even considered hurting himself. Chris Watts got a taste of freedom and didn't want to be a dad, a husband, a family man anymore. He longed for a life with his mistress. Is nature Brian Laundrie's MK? Was Gabby standing in the way of him living the life that he so desperately wanted, like Shanann was in the way of Chris Watts being with his mistress? Both felt like there was an obstacle in the way preventing them from living the life that they wanted. We don't even know yet what happened to Gabby, but I wouldn't be surprised if whatever happened during a heated argument, and maybe even in the same manner. Chris Watts later admitted that he actually planned this for weeks. He said that he knew that that night would be the last night that he ever tucked his girls in at bedtime. Did Brian plan this? It's been said that he flew home after the domestic violence incident and moved all of Gabby's stuff into storage. As far as we know, Shanann Watts was killed in the early morning hours of August 13th. August 12th, the same day as the incident between Gabby and Brian, that was basically a foreshadowing of what was to come. August 12th was also the same day that the two women were killed in Moab. If Brian was responsible for those murders as well, he would have killed 3 people, like Chris Watts, except Watts also killed his unborn son. Police do say that the incidents are not connected to Brian Laundrie and that it's unrelated, but it's still yet another strange coincidence. Both Gabby and Shanann became the victims of their partners in life. I know with Brian it's technically alleged, but Brian is the only suspect, and I seriously doubt that he is innocent of these crimes. Both of these two cowards took the lives of people that most men would sacrifice their own lives for. They took their bodies out to a remote, desolated place and left them alone with no regard for the hurt and pain that they had caused. Gabby and Shanann had loving families who they were very close with. It was obvious that these tragedies were horrific for them. You can see the pain in their faces. Their lives were forever changed. Both families have raised money in honor of their daughters. The Ruseks raised money for the Lupus Foundation, and the Petitos are raising money for others to help find missing loved ones. Regardless of similarities and differences, both of these men committed horrible acts that not only shocked the nation, but destroyed people's lives. In events like these, there is a ripple effect, where it affects hundreds, if not thousands, of people. These horrific tragedies will affect these families for the rest of their lives. We do not know yet how finding justice for Gabby will end. With Brian still on the loose, We can only hope that soon he will be forced to face the consequences for his actions. There's no doubt in my mind that, like Chris Watts, he will be held accountable.
Near Grand Teton National Park in Wyoming at the Spread Creek camping area. This is a devastating end to the search for the 22-year-old from Northport who disappeared weeks ago while on a trip with her fiancé, Brian Laundrie. Gabby's family was quickly notified of Sunday's discovery. Just minutes after the FBI's announcement, Joseph Petito, Gabby's father, posted this picture on Twitter, writing, "Gabby Petito, she touched the